next reader, oh, I should say, without any more falderall for myself, our next reader is Katharine Coldiron. She is the author of Ceremonials, an SPD bestseller. Her work as a book critic has appeared in The Washington Post, The Believer, The Guardian, and many other places. She lives in California and at kcoldiron.com. Katharine, you should be able to unmute and proceed. Maybe?
Okay, this is me proceeding.
There we go.
Congratulations on pronouncing my name correctly. I know that I shouldn't, that sounds condescending, but honestly, like the guy at Vroman's just didn't say my last name at all. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And thank you, Noli, and thank you, TGI, and thank you, Trina. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is my book, Ceremonials, also big poster in the background. I'm a little tired of reading from this book because it's short. And so I've read almost everything that I can read from it. So I'm going to read something else. And I picked something kind of strange. Marissa Siegel at The Rumpus asked me to write one of their Letters in the Mail series. If you don't know about that, it's where you sign up for these letters in the mail and they ask writers to write these letters and then they're physically sent to you. And the timeline is funky. So she said, you can't say anything about current events because it's probably going to be stale by the time we send out the letter. And this was like shortly after the pandemic started, I think. So I had to figure out a way to write about what was going on in my life without writing about the pandemic. And I was really glad that I didn't because the BLM protests exploded like the next month. And I thought, oh my God, what if I wrote a letter and it didn't have that anyway? Because this reading series is occupied by so many writers, I thought that this letter would be useful and interesting. And especially since probably not very many of you subscribe to Letters in the Mail, you wouldn't have gotten this. Dearest friends, as I write this, I'm square in the middle of binging the Star Trek series Voyager. I've watched The Next Generation many, many times, and this is my first foray off the Enterprise. It's acting on me in curious ways. I find myself with excess emotions I can't seem to burn off, where usually when I'm involved in a show, it's my brain that won't stop working on it. A lot of the characters in Voyager make mistakes, and the consequences ripple on into the future of the future in realistic, fascinating ways. Last year, I watched The Wire, which acted on me more cerebrally, and I came up with a hypothesis. Mistakes are like putting nitrous oxide into your narrative gas tank. Kaboom! When a character makes a mistake, the world around her has to rejigger. Other characters have to adjust. Consequences appear in waves across time and space. Friendships end stupidly over mistakes. Murderers are only caught because they make mistakes. Kingdoms are won and lost for them. I read and reviewed a book recently where the author was clearly putting her characters through a series of required actions as if they were puppets, rather than letting them move beyond the boundaries of their little stage. I yearned for at least one of them to make a mistake, something serious, maybe unrecoverable. I wanted the author to write a character into a corner instead of pushing her along a straight line. Alas, the author has bestseller status to maintain, so the characters kept dancing on her strings, lessening their exposure to risk, walking back rash decisions. It wasn't a fun book to read. It offered a series of low, unimpressive narrative obstacles, hoops successfully jumped through, their fires extinguished. Other books are premised on mistakes. In Rebecca, the second Mrs. De Winter makes absolute bucketfuls of mistakes, and so does Maxim, who has amazingly poor intuition about the women he marries. Moby Dick, of all books, maybe Ishmael should not have joined the crew of the Pequod in the first place. Elena Ferrante's work is shot through with characters who make terrible errors. No life is free of mistakes, and no good novel ought to be either. What I'm saying isn't new. Aristotle called this idea hamartia, tragic error. Hamartia was interpreted across literary history as an innate, deep-set flaw, but modern scholarship has argued it's more of an on-the-fly mistake, rather than a prominent character trait that clashes just right with the surrounding plot circumstances. Hamlet, not Antigone. Hamlet makes a pile of errors based on bad judgment and emotional unrest, while the characterization in Antigone, those traits set against each other, makes murder a foregone conclusion. One of the other threads running through Voyager is failure. I broke down in helpless tears when, in The Last Jedi, Yoda pointed out that failure is one of our greatest teachers. It certainly has proven so for me. Only through failure have I learned to value success. It's rare and hard to write about failure, though, or to make syndicated television about it. So many more possibilities. Failure and mistakes are fractalizing elements of a narrative work, causing more complications per capita than any other kind of plot choice, which means you, as a writer, must have the requisite imagination and the requisite measure of authorial control to determine what's going to happen to your sad little fellow in the center of the storm. Maybe he just can't overcome his flaws and failures. Maybe some weirdo loves him because of his flaws, and this causes him to indulge his worst self. Maybe after many years of failure, he assembles a decent existence out of scotch tape and balsa wood, one that can't withstand a particularly heavy rainstorm, and then a typhoon comes to town. I want to see more characters failing and making mistakes, only to fix them or work around them and keep going. On Voyager, they have no other choice because they're trapped alone together in an unfamiliar section of space, facing 70 years of travel before they get back to our solar system. That means they repair themselves again and again, reinvent themselves over and over. They don't act perfectly or predictably. They act like human beings, which means they screw up and then they have to face the embarrassment of having screwed up in front of the same 150 people as ever and wake up the next day and make amends and move on. What does that do to a character? I look at her and I see all the mistakes she's ever made, along with all the love she's given out and all the integrity she represents. I see a person with a full history, someone who does her best, which is just not always enough. If she makes no mistakes at all, I'll see a lifeless paper doll, a puppet who will never create meaning in my life. I'll forget her and I won't recommend her story to anyone else. How can we shore ourselves up if we don't overcome failure and remember the crystal sharp sensation of that perseverance when we feel helpless? And how can characters compel us unless they have to do the same? Before I married my husband, I didn't understand the continuity of family. Mistakes are difficult to move beyond in my family. My father still holds a grudge against me for events from 1998. My husband's family is more demonstrative and impulsive, which means they often say silly or rude things, and then we have to apologize to each other and get beyond it. Well into my adult life, I had to learn how to forgive and forget, instead of sort of forgiving and never forgetting. Family is close-knit and permanent for him in a way it wasn't for me, and that means that there are dips and bumps in our relationships with each other instead of the pacific uniformity that emotional distance achieves. It all has a cohesion, an unspoken unbrokenness that was hard for me to comprehend and adhere to. The same thing goes on in Voyager. The residents of that ship have to be a family since they're all together day after day for 7 damn decades, which is a human lifespan. They have to forgive and forget in ways that most crews don't, since members of other crews can just request transfers and be gone in a few weeks. There's a permanence there, a continuity that builds a strong and reasonable foundation for these motifs of failure and error. It's a pretty remarkable set of choices for TV writers to make in the mid-1990s. I dare you to make those choices too. Let your characters screw up recklessly and look around at the wreckage with no idea how to fix it. Write your main squeeze into a corner and make her do something unforgivable. See where that engine takes you. With love and failure. Thank you.